One of the traditions we have here is the second Sunday of the month, we go over what our young people have studied in their class. And this morning they studied from 1 Samuel 25 in this account with David, Nabal, and Abigail. And really one of the lessons that they were supposed to be learning from this is the great virtue in choosing to be servants instead of being selfish. And I do think that when we look at that word selfishness, that it's one that, when you think about it, most of the sins that we commit, if not all, are related to the idea of either pride or selfishness. And they are so closely tied together that they're almost indistinguishable. And so that's why it's so very important for us to learn from them. I know that in this congregation, one of the things that I've always admired about the brethren is that service is something that seems to be an ongoing thing that so many participate in, and there's never a lack of someone that can help to meet the needs of someone else in the congregation who may be in want of something. And one of the other things that we oftentimes do in this congregation is we'll talk about what our love languages might be. And me personally, I'm a quality time person, which means I really enjoy being with other people and spending time together. My wife is an acts of service person. That means she enjoys seeing me lift things and move it around. And so it's not always easy for people to coexist with different types of ways of expressing their love and devotion. One of the things that's very unique about this story that we're going to see is not only, and you've probably read this story before, it may be familiar to you, you know that the word Nabal, the name Nabal means fool, and we're going to see how foolish this man really was. Abigail becomes one of the wives of David because she is very wise and she's very prudent, and as the story says, she was beautiful and discerning type of person. She was somebody who exudes selfishness, or selflessness, I should say, in giving herself humbly to be the one who's punished for the actions even of her husband. And we look at both of those, and none of us want to be, and none of us probably are as foolish as Nabal was. And Abigail is probably the one that we aspire to be. However, David may be the one that we are most closely related to. And I think that's what's so very unique about this story, because 1 Samuel 25 is not like a lot of other chapters in the Bible where it's about politics or about warfare. It's really about relationships and how it is that even someone like David could destroy the man that he is meant to be if he's not careful about restraining himself, even though he himself has already been providing someone's service. And I think there's a great lesson in that. So selfishness is one of those things that is very pervasive. And it's one of the reasons why this is an important lesson for our young people, because this is something that you learn over time. That when a child is very, very young, then every need that they have is expressed through screaming and crying and those types of things until it is met. And that's something that has to be trained out of them. This last Friday night, there was a hockey game in Allen, and we've got season tickets to the Allen Americans to watch that. Bo loves to watch hockey, and so Kyle and the kids came with me to the hockey game, and I got Bo this big tub of popcorn. And he's sitting there, and he's got this big tub of popcorn in front of him, and he's eating this popcorn, and he's enjoying himself. After about 5 or 10 minutes, he says, "Papa, could you please not put your hand in my popcorn anymore?" I tried to relate to a 4-year-old that I bought your ticket, I bought the popcorn, you're sitting in that seat because of my grace and mercy. But he didn't listen to that. If we're not careful, selfishness is one of those things that causes us to forget just how good things really are. And it can destroy us from being the kind of people we're supposed to be, even as it had the potential of doing David, even in this story. So we're going to be going through this account this morning. Hopefully there'll be some lessons that you can take home that would be benefit to you. So if you're ready for the 3 key words, let's see the notebooks held up high this morning. All right, very cool. Okay, your 3 words for this morning are selfishness, service, and restraint. Because when we go through the 3 key characters in this chapter, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see the selfishness of Nabal, we're going to see the service of Abigail, and then we're going to see the flawed service of David, which was really about exercising restraint. So selfishness, service, and restraint are the words we're going to be looking at. So first, the verses that were read for us introduces us to this situation at hand. But if you back up to verse 1 in 1 Samuel 25, you see the setting of the time period that Samuel, the great prophet, had died. or the great judge rather, had died. And so there's really no one that's going to be left now to give King Saul any type of real spiritual guidance and wisdom. Saul is the king, and so he is on the throne and he is ruling, but David is the one who's actually been anointed by God to be the next king. And so there's been this animosity that's been existing, and so David is actually on the run from King Saul when he comes upon these shepherds from this man Nabal. And as was read for us, this man Nabal in those first few verses is described as someone who is very rich in verse 2, but he's also described as being someone who is harsh and evil in his dealings. And if you go to verses 17 and verse 25, notice these things. In verse 17, this man is called by his own servants to be a scoundrel. In verse 25, his own wife says, as his name is, so is he. He is a scoundrel and he is a fool. And so you're introduced at this very beginning to this man who's going to exhibit some selfishness because of the way in which he views himself. His own servants say that this man is unapproachable, that we tried to reason with him and he would not listen. He was not willing to heed any of the words that we spoke to him. No one can even approach him because of how harsh and cruel he is. And this is a strange situation because David has been out there with his own men, and his men describe David's protection of them, not just that he didn't take anything from them or do them harm, but he was like a wall to their men. He surrounded them and protected them both day and night. And his own men appreciated that. And when David sent back word, he tells them that I have done all these things for your men, and you can go and ask your men, and you can see that these things are so. But Nabal's response is, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse that I should listen to him? There have been a lot of people who have left their masters and are wandering around. Why should I pay any regard to him whatsoever? Let's pick up at verse 10. Nabal answered David's servant, saying this very thing. There are many servants nowadays who break away, each one from his master. And in verse 11, you see this. Shall I then take my bread? I want you to underline all the my's in this verse. Shall I take then my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give to men whom I do not know where they are from? So David's young men turned their heels and went back, and they came and they told David all of these words. One of the things we see about Nabal that is so horrifying is that he was the kind of man who could not be approached because of the way in which he only wanted to be concerned with his own things and not those of others. A fool has no delight in understanding but in expressing his own heart. He didn't want to stop and consider all that David had done for him. He was only interested in my bread, my meat, my things. And he only wanted to express his own desire to hang on to those things. If you think about it, what we read from Nabal here is very similar to Luke chapter 12. And you remember in Luke chapter 12, you want to go ahead and turn over there to that. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus has been teaching about many things concerning the kingdom and the way in which he is going to rule and reign over his kingdom. And as he's even dealing with the hypocrisy of some of the teachers of the time and how it is that men should confess his name, one from the crowd in verse 13 interrupts that and says, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And it's one of those moments where you can imagine that Jesus would be wanting to slap his palm upon his forehead, that I'm teaching about all of these things, but you are interested in this other thing. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And so Jesus tells a story of this man who's in verse 16, it yielded plentifully his crops. But then he has this problem. And think about how horrible this problem is. He thought within himself, what shall I do since I have no room to store my crops? And the great blessing that he's been given was something that became a burden to him. But notice also how this man continually uses the words I and my in what he says. So he thought within himself, what shall I do since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater. And there I will store all of my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, so you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But just as it was that Nabal is called a fool, in verse 20 you see that God calls this man fool. This night your soul is required of you. Then all these things that you have, who are they going to go to now? And so a man's life does not consist of the things that he possesses. That's not the true meaning of what life is. But that's what selfishness blinds us to. If we're not careful, that can become our God and the thing which we worship itself. In Proverbs 16 and verse 18, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. You see this with Nabal. You see this with the man in Luke chapter 12, that they were ungrateful for the protection that had been given to them and dismissive even of David himself. Back in 1 Samuel 25, if you skip down closer to the end of that chapter, verses 36 through 38, this is what was going to happen to them, or what eventually did happen to Nabal. Abigail went to Nabal, and there he was, holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing, little or much, until morning light. So it was in the morning, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. And then it happened after 10 days, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Such is the destiny of all that are so foolish as Nabal. One of the lessons I think we need to walk away from in this is that we need to be very, very careful about this my attitude. This is mine, this is mine, this is mine. If somebody wants something from us, well, I can't because this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. And we can look at other people as trying to invade that and take that away from us. And we can just be very dismissive of others. Well, who is this person that I should listen to them? Who is this person? Because they're just like so many others that are in the world. And it's very easy because of the things that we do see in the world where people are very much abusive of others when it comes to trying to take from others. That is a true thing. And there are times where denial is the right course of action. But brother, we have to be very careful about excusing ourselves because of the my type of attitude. That is something that is unhealthy for us. However, you do see that this man's wife, whose name was Abigail, instead of being a portrait of folly, she's indeed a model of humility and of wisdom. In verse 3 again of 1 Samuel 25, you see that this woman is described as a woman of good understanding and beautiful in appearance. That throughout this chapter, we're going to see so many things about her that give her great testimony as being a wise and discerning woman. If you go down to verses 18 and 19, David has made this plan that he's going to go back and he's going to destroy everybody in Nabal's home. And so Abigail finds out about this and from the servants. And in verse 18, then Abigail made haste, took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys, and said to her servants, go on before me, saying, I'm coming after you. Well, obviously, because she had a lot to haul with her. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So it was as she rode the donkey that she went down under the cover of the hill, and there were David and his men coming down toward her, and she met them. One of the first things that we see about Abigail that's very commendable is that she was proactive. And so I would like for you to think about and maybe take note of the words we're going to use about Abigail. What does it mean to really be a servant to other people? One of the first things we see about her is that she was proactive. She didn't wait for harm to come. She did not wait for David to come to the borders of their land or their household across the hedgerow. She went out to him, and she sent word out to him to make sure she got out ahead of this thing before it got bad. So first thing that we see about her is very proactive. She really, in a lot of ways, demonstrates the same characteristics as a woman in Proverbs 31. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. Because when she did come to David, notice what she says. Look down at verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground. So she fell at his feet and said, on me, my Lord, on me let this iniquity be. And please let your maidservant speak in your ears and hear the words of your maidservant. Please let not my Lord regard this scoundrel Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord, whom you sent. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be as Nabal. And now this present which your maidservant has brought to my Lord, let it be given to the young men and follow my Lord. One of the next words that we can associate with Abigail is someone who is humble. That she goes to David, she falls on her face, and she does something that's remarkable. She tells David, let it be blamed upon me. Let it be considered my fault, because I didn't know that your servants had come. I didn't hear their words. If I had, these things would have been different, but I wasn't there, and I couldn't take care of that. Please let the iniquity be found in me. And she actually takes the blame for something that wasn't even her fault because of how humble she is. And she does it all for the sake of peace. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. She didn't go out there and blame David or his servants. Well, your servant should have come and found me. Your servant should have told me this. Your servant should have, your servants and you. She didn't blame David for any of it. She says, I wasn't there. I'm sorry for that. And she took the blame. Being a servant means being humble. And sometimes that humility comes at the expense of taking blame for things that are not your fault. And that's what she was actually willing to do. The thing about it is that when we're talking about what is really a servant, what a servant really is, it's not just the giving of gifts. It's not just the extending yourself in hospitality toward others, but it's what is the product that's supposed to be brought about. Here we see that one of them is about peace, about bringing some reconciliation. And when she speaks to David, she speaks in such a humble way that David actually listens to her. She humbly asked David forgiveness for something that wasn't even her fault to begin with. Another thing that we see about Abigail in verses 27 and 28, when she said, this present your maidservant has brought to my Lord, and then she asked for that forgiveness in verse 28, is that she's also being very selfless because she's looking out for the interests of someone else. Being a servant means that we're going to be selfless people. We're looking out for the interests of other people. That's what service is really all about. We have passages in the New Testament, such as in Philippians chapter 2, 3, and 4. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind. See the humility once again even. Let each esteem others better than themselves. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. Abigail was out there looking out for her own interests. She was looking out for the interests of those in her household. She was also looking out for the interests of David, because she reminds David, look down in verses 30 through 35. And it shall come to pass when the Lord has done for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you ruler over Israel, that this will be no grief to you, nor offense of heart to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself. But when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. Then David said to Abigail, blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed is your advice. Blessed are you. Blessed you have, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. For indeed, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to me, surely by morning light no males would have been left to Nabal. So David received from her hand what she had brought him, and said to her, go in peace to your house. See, I've heeded your voice and respected your person. Another word that we can associate with being a servant is the word diplomatic. And you see this with Abigail, that she is diplomatic with David. She not only saved her household in keeping David from avenging himself, but she also preserved who David was meant to be. David should not have been as brutal as we see that he was about to be. And she reasoned with him that the Lord has already determined that you're going to be the king. You're going to be the next ruler. And when you're in that position, this could be something that you're going to look back on and probably regret. That now you are the king over Israel. You are God's anointed. But you took the time to wipe out the family of a horrible, foolish shepherd because he slighted you. And she reminded David of that. And one of the great things that we do see about David is he heeded her advice in that moment. We have to be careful when it comes to being of service to other people, that if we are truly being of service to them, then sometimes when you do good things for somebody, they think you have an ulterior motive. It's kind of like, you do something nice for your wife and she says, well, what do you want? And sometimes when we do that for other people, that's the response that we sometimes get as well. We can't allow ourselves to be offended by that, but understand that that is something that happens from time to time. So let's think about David. As I said a moment ago, I think David is the one that we probably most associate with when it comes to this. David's service was very flawed. And in him we see really, as I said at the beginning, a lesson in restraint. The song that David led at the very beginning, the first song we sang this morning was, "Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me." And it says if someone has been so unkind to you, they spoke a word that pierces you through and through, then you're supposed to think about how Jesus was reviled, how he was treated. And let that be the motivation to be more like Christ. What we see with David is that David was not asked to provide any service for Nabal, but he did it. He saw some men out here in the field who were shepherds. If David had wanted to, he could have taken action and killed those men and took all their possessions. He didn't do that. He could have seen other people coming in to take those men's possession and to kill them and ignored it and said, well, it's none of my business. And he didn't do that either. David was someone that these men said he had been a wall to us. He had protected us. They didn't harm us or take anything from us. They actually helped us along the way. David wasn't asked to do that, but David did it. But when it was not appreciated, what was David's first response? David's first response when word came back from Nabal about what he thought about David and his men, David's first response was to say to his men, "Every man arm yourself for battle." That was his first response. Now be honest. You're not asked to do something nice for someone, you volunteer to do it. And you provide some service to them, something because you care, you feel it's your duty, it's something that you want to do, it's something that's become part of who you are, is to provide service for someone. And their first response is to badmouth you. Their first response is to question your motive. Their first response when you don't do what it is they want you to do is to say something bad about you. What is your first response to it? This is something that we do see with David a lot. David was someone who very much externalized his emotions. They were always on his sleeve, whether it be his love and devotion for God in the Psalms or that you see, and you can go through 1 Samuel, earlier chapters and several chapters into the future, and you can see time and time and time again, I think it's at least 6 or 8 different times where it says that David armed himself and his men. David was constantly arming himself for battle. This occasion he didn't because of Abigail. But David's first response was to react in anger. Now could have said, no, it's righteous indignation. I'm justified in this because he has insulted me. He has questioned me. And I've done all these great things for him. I am right in taking vengeance. I am right in executing justice. And he was not. We never do things because of some type of position of pride that we have. Or there's some type of personal insult that means nothing. And yet that's where David was. The Bible warns us in Proverbs 16 and verse 32 that he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, than he who rules his spirit, than he who takes the city. We're supposed to capture those emotions. We're to hold them hostage to what is true and righteous. Proverbs 15 and verse 1 tells us, or James 1, 19 and 20 rather tells us, so then, my brethren, let everyone be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Anger has a way of clouding our judgment and it leads to rash vows, even as it did with David, to destroy. One of the things that David did not do here that he did in other situations, David never stopped to pray. He didn't slow down enough to just pray to God, inquire of the Lord. You remember, it was one of the things that even got Israel into trouble when they had been defeated in one of their battles. Well, we don't have the Ark of the Covenant with us. They didn't even ask God if they were supposed to go into battle to begin with. They get defeated, so then they go back and they grab the Ark as if it's some good luck charm, and they get defeated again, and the Ark's taken away from them. It was not that they even had a thought in mind to slow down and ask God if this is actually what we're supposed to do. Even Abigail has to remind David, the Lord has already blessed you. The Lord has already anointed you. The Lord has already set you up. The Lord has given you these things. The Lord has actually restrained your hand from doing the thing that you want to do. We have to capture that. We have to hold that hostage and not let that be our first reaction. As I said, acts of service is something I think that we're very, very good at. But don't let it be flawed service. Don't let it be that you're looking to make sure that someone repays you in kind. Even Jesus warned that if you do good to those that can do good to you, you don't have a reward for that. That's something that even the people in the world will do. You're supposed to do good to those who aren't going to appreciate it. And do it anyway, because you're doing it as unto the Lord and not unto man. David was one, though, his first reaction and his habit often would get him into trouble or to get him out of trouble. And with David, you see that with anger, it clouds judgment. And clouded judgment causes us to not look to God for guidance and wisdom. Romans 12 and verse 19 says, Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. If there is something that I think is very difficult, and I know it's something that I have struggled with often through the years, is that idea of let God take care of that. I'm not going to get into an argument with somebody over something that does not need to be argued about. I'm not going to get into some heated debate with someone that does not need to be debated at all to begin with. The insults that another person has, I'm not judged by that person. It's God who judges me. That's so very hard to slow down to think about that. But that's one of the things that I've had to rehearse over the years to remind myself of. And I think it's something that David is being reminded of even in this occasion. So let's learn to be restrained as well. And so the question I'm going to leave with you this morning is this. How can you actively choose service over selfishness? Can you find someone who needs your help and needs your assistance? Probably not going to appreciate it. That's not even a factor that goes into it. How can you choose to not hold on and have a my attitude? That's what this is about. Parents, this lesson that our young people went through this week is a very valuable lesson. It's one that needs to start at a very, very young age to be taught to them. It's taught in things like sharing your toys. It's taught in lessons like giving to someone who doesn't have the things that you have and not expecting anything in return. That is a lesson that many of us as adults have a hard time with. So let's make sure that we're teaching our young people at the stage they're at right now to choose the ways of our Lord and to be more like Him. If you're subject to the invitation this morning, if you're not a Christian and you want to be, waters of baptism are ready. If you need to repent of any sin, come back to God, need the prayers of the saints, that's what we're here for. Whatever your need may be, if we can help you in any way, please let us know as we stand and sing this song.